Sometimes you just need to turn off the distractions, get to work, and find the universal truths that affect us all and that govern our universe. This is a good place to do that. Mark Foltz and Kat Hobson will try to help with that a bit by bringing fantastic guests. Let's see what's happening tonight.
Welcome to Universal Truths with Mark Foltz. We are coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama. And I am myself coming to you from beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And, of course, you know, I'm a psychic. I work here in Pensacola. Anyone that ever wants to meet me in person, I work at Live and Let Live Metaphysical Store on 4622 Softly Field Road. Call in before you come in to make sure I'm in there that day. But usually, for sure, I'm in there all Friday, all Saturday. And there are two other readers besides me, Tony Talley and Terry O'Connor, and Sal Gandolfo and Matthew Ferguson. Sal owns the store. Matthew helps him run it. And they're so good at helping people with their metaphysical needs. So, but if you ever want to meet me in person, that's where me will be. And if you call in and I'm not there, you know, they can call me and tell me. Just say, you know, where's Mark? Tonight, I'm going to cover a subject I don't think I've ever heard, well, I've never heard it spoke of before, which is the modern replacement for the goddess. And we are very hardwired. See, I'm in metaphysics. I've been in metaphysics since I was 18. I'm now 60. And I was in a group, you know, of metaphysical people, and it was very heavy on the God and goddess aspect, the polarity. And even in Christianity, you have a goddess aspect, which you have Jesus, you have God, you have Jesus, but as the feminine, you have Mother Mary, which actually in Latino countries, they have more of a worship of Mary than they do Jesus. And so, and the Catholic Church allows that because it brings in so many people. So usually we have some feminine mystique, some feminine energy that we cling to or that we are empowered by. And in our consciousness, because we are in such a patriarchal society, they poo-poo, of course, the feminine. They try to avoid the feminine, even if the feminine, if there's a feminine person that is very strong, they combat that, you know, but then again, they can't combat, do anything about the people who follow strong women. And there's a reason why we like strong women, whether you're a guy or a girl or you're gay, you're straight, you know, and gay people really appreciate the feminine. So that's one reason, you know, because they have to battle that all the time, people giving them trouble for the feminine. So they like a strong feminine spokesperson. and but in the ancient days, of course, we had matriarchal societies, and patriarchal, and in a lot of them they were balanced. They had the male, the feminine. They had a god, a goddess, and up until about, I think it was the Egyptian time, they started going, well, there can only be one aspect, and that's a male god. And when that happened, then people began to tinker with getting rid of the feminine. And they went through, they cleaned out, they got rid of the priestesses and the goddess representations, and they wiped them out. And what I mean, you know what I mean by wiped out. And it was no longer. Now, we have some very strong leftovers. We do have the Queen of England, who is a very strong feminine aspect. We do have but, of course, she's 90-something years old. She's got like the remnant of the matriarchal. And we have a fascination with these people. And we have a fascination with people like Princess Diana. We have a fascination with stars, because since we don't have a goddess replacement, we have it so hardwired in our system that we kind of subconsciously find someone to be a goddess representation. And in our society, we don't have that in our religions, so we look towards the entertainment field. And some of tonight, what I want to cover is going to be the stars that were in movies and music and things like that. That's where we find our goddess representations. And some of them reached incredible heights. And then, there are the flip sides. Some of them paid a huge price for being human, or because being a goddess, worshiping a person as a goddess or a god. The thing is, depending upon what you're worshiping them for, if it's mainly for their beauty, beauty fades. And in a matriarchal society, we would have more empathy for the matriarch, for the female. In the patriarchal, they think women are beautiful, 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 and then they reach a certain age and they go, next. And then that's why you see these old men, my age, 60, and so, with bald heads and convertibles, trying to have young girlfriends to make themselves look masculine. And when there's plenty of women their own age that are still vibrant and interesting and beautiful, they, in metaphysics, we have the maid, mother, crone. In Christianity, you have, the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. But there is a triple goddess aspect that we all have draws to, which is the maiden, which usually somebody up until about their 20s, 30s, then the mother, and that's when the girl becomes a mother. She becomes a representation of fertility, of Gaia and knowledge. And then the crone, which men crone, but it's a little differently. But women that are crones, it sounds terrible to call someone a crone, but it's actually a very important aspect. They've learned, they've grown, they have knowledge, they've gotten rid of their baby fat, they understand and are nurturing, but also can be a mama bear. They They can be someone who can be tough, who can be strong, who can lead, who can be independent and not have to have a male energy to make everything all right. The female aspect is totally its own strengths. The thing with the mother, men have a aspect. I mean, they have a part in fertility, but the woman carries the baby. The woman feeds the baby is feeding upon their air, their blood, their food, and then they have the baby, and then they have a huge part usually in raising that child, shaping that child, because babies are not just pet rocks. Some people act like they're pet rocks, and you just feed it, play with it, and it should be okay. They're fully formed spirits who have to step into, they have to develop, that have to become their own people. And so women have a very important part in that. But in our society, like the society I came from, I'm 60, so I remember the 60s and 70s. And the woman was struggling. They were meant to not, if they showed any self-sufficient kind of things, they didn't like that. So the woman had to be reliant upon the man. Look to the man, and basically they cooked and cleaned and had babies, which is part of it, but it leaves out them being the consciousness to help lead the child into adulthood, to understand their strengths and to understand, to accept the strength of a woman, or to accept the nurturing of a woman, or to hold woman in high regard. And women in my era, if you weren't, and this was real big in my mother's family, which they were all beautiful girls and beautiful guys, but if you weren't pretty, you had no value. So that was really prominent in society. It was really, there was value in the beauty. And the thing with beauty, especially if you're a glamorous person, beauty at the peak of youth beauty, it only lasts a moment. And you're like a jeweled dragonfly suspended in the air for just a moment. And then, you cannot sustain that beauty like that. It has to develop. It becomes more. It becomes deeper. You become older. You become wiser. And the fragile beauty only lasts for just a moment. And we as people, since we're looking for the goddess to look for, we grab onto who we really see. Now think about this. I'm going to go into some of the movie goddesses we've had. Because imagine, at the early part of the 1900s, there were movies, but they were silent for a long time. And then when they went into talkies, when they could speak and you could hear them and you could hear the vibration, it added a new element to what we were watching. And what we were watching were the goddesses of that day. In the silent era, we had people like Gloria Swanson, Greta Garbo, and Marlene Dietrich, and Theda Bara, and things. But then when the talkies came in, it became a whole different playing field. And the very first platinum love goddess, sex goddess, that came roaring in like a motorcycle was Jean Harlo. So I'm going to show you talk about Jean Harlo, Norma Jean Baker, as we know, Marilyn Monroe, and Jayne Mansfield, because who was a star of the 50s and 60s, a contemporary of Marilyn Monroe's. And Jean Harlo was really kind of the beginning of the modern goddess fad, and it went, of course, we know how Marilyn did, and it ended with Jayne Mansfield because as a society, because of the growth we were going through, the blonde goddess became a sad symbol and a difficult symbol. And in the 60s, Jayne Mansfield was the last symbol of that particular brand of sex goddess, beauty goddess. And she paid a terrible price. Terrible price. But we're going to try and cover it. I'm going to try, and I'll be talking about them individually. Then before the show is over, I'll make sure you understand that I'm saying, what I'm saying. But I'm going to use as examples. In the modern era up to now, we have Madonna. We have, who was a huge female goddess symbol, powerful, creative, writes her own music and dances and creating, the mother creator. And then once she began to, she's in the crone phase at the moment, which you may not like that. Sorry, Madonna. But she's in the phase where she's older. So now the male thinks of, next. And she's having to find her femininity and her power in the crone phase. But I think she's one that will figure it out. She'll adapt to it. And also the things like Stevie Nicks, moving into from just the love of youth, which we really came into in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, to having now some of those symbols like Stevie Nicks and Cher, Tina Turner, Betty White, women who are moved in Dolly Parton, people who have moved into their 70s and 80s and are still current and producing and vibrant. And that's something in our society that has been missing for a while. And I think as a modern people, it's good to see older women as still able. They may not have the freshness of dew on them to be like a 20-year-old nymph, but they still are important and creative and beautiful. And so hopefully the upcoming generations will, I think they're evolving, the kids are evolving to understand that there's more than just youth beauty. But, because we have to deal with ageism all the time. Even men deal with it. But women have to deal with it. It's a terrible thing because they'll go, oh, well, she's old. Well, when you get in your 60s, you're really feeling good. You feel better in your life. You have understanding. We have to address and accept and embrace the youth and the age, and we'll become deeper people. We'll become more understandable. But we are going to go to a break for a moment. And when we get back, I'm going to dig into the blonde goddess. We're going to start talking about Jean Harlo. And so all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Paratalk Radio is your one-stop for all things paranormal, the unknown, and the supernatural. Join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central for discussions and guests on topics such as ghosts, hauntings, Bigfoot, UFOs, and more. This broadcast is rated M for mature and intended for listeners over 16 on paratalkradio.com.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope.
That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz. I'm coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm coming to you from my home in beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And we're talking about the modern replacement goddess. And, you know, within my parents' age, which was they were born in 1930, movies were new still. I mean, they had been around a little bit before that, and they were silent films. But by the 30s, and they had the talkies, and they started to get color. And so they needed colorful people to entertain us. And those people became the modern gods and goddesses. Like people just, we naturally have a need for a god or goddess aspect. So Rudolph Valentino, you know, Jean Harlo's, the Clark Gables, and Carol Lombard's, and actually we'll cover Carol Lombard because Kat just reminded me of Carol Lombard. Another tragic, beautiful blonde. But we're going to talk about the blonde fascination to begin with. Why are we fascinated with blondes, especially platinum blondes? It is a thing that when I was young, I really, when I was in my teenage years, I'm an artist. So I had an affinity for beauty, for drawing. And I discovered all these 1950s pinup magazines, the stuff my dad had. And in those pinups, the women who had the there were many, many, many beautiful women. But the ones that were platinum, there's just something else to them at a certain aspect in their life. And as a metaphysical person, some of the more ancient spirits that I've run into have this beautiful, almost like cotton, white hair. Usually kind of curls or crimped, but it's this beautiful, shimmering blonde, white blonde hair. And I think maybe it comes from something in our past that, and these spirits that have this white hair, they are some of the travelers that have come. I don't like to always say something is an alien. What is an alien? It's somebody who is a foreigner or a traveler who has come from outside of our space to here. So we call them alienists to us, but I kind of consider them travelers. But these ancient energies, which they're pretty old, their intensity is incredible. I mean, when you look at them, they're pretty, but they're also kind of scary. But the hair is this beautiful, angelic, like a halo around their faces. And I think we kind of have that same response to these women who have that hair, a particular kind of platinum. So in the 30s, when Jean Harlo came about, she was the first platinum blonde. That was huge. And she was, her still pictures of her, if you look at them, look at the intensity. Here was, you know, if you get to hear her voice, she was huge, huge, huge. I mean, during her time, she was phenomenal. But she wasn't a typical blonde beauty. She didn't have this beautiful felt voice, this elegant voice. She had a kind of a Bronx honk. But if you were just to look at the images of her, she's gorgeous. Even this time later, almost 100 years later, she's gorgeous. If she appeared and walked, she was across the street, she would stop traffic. She was, and she brought with her not only beauty, but she brought a sexuality that was different than anyone else had. She was gorgeous, she was beautiful, she was sexy, but she also was not threatening. She was a non-threatening sexual creature. She was, I think that in real life, if she were around women, women would forget, they would go, oh yeah, it's Jayne, you know, of course you're going to fall in love with Jayne. They didn't seem to be threatened by her. As a matter of fact, they fell in love with her because she didn't take herself seriously. But on the image on the screen, she was just like an angel in some things. She just had that light coming from behind her, and that hair would glow. And I think the platinum blonde also kind of brings in the idea of angelic energies or something unique about them. And she was huge. But in her day, she was Marilyn, what Marilyn would be to the 50s and 60s. She was, and Jayne Mansfield would be up there almost to, she was competitor, the second in line with Marilyn Monroe. And at a point, she was the poor man's Marilyn, they would call her. But she was gorgeous, beautiful, funny, and very much of an earth mother kind of thing. But all of them were tragic. And I think out of all of them, I think Jayne had the most tragic life and ending. But it's like, Marilyn was tragic, but Jayne lived long enough to see what happens when people find you to be too human and they're holding you to this high standard. And then you live long enough for them to see that you're real, that you have problems, that you're not a goddess. And they punish people for that. They punish you. They want to find someone to worship. But if it goes on long enough, then they want to see you be human and fall just like they do. And they also like to see people get up from being knocked down. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So we have the Jean Harlo effect, which changed women. We were coming out of the Victorian era. Women, couldn't show their ankles. I mean, 20 years before her, you are shocking if you showed your ankle that didn't have stocking on it, even if it had stocking on it. We went from a very repressed to a very open sexuality, and she was at the forefront of that. And she, behind the scenes, she had a terrible life, terrible relationships, terrible parents. Well, her biological dad was a great guy. But the things she was going through with her mother and her skanky husband she had married, and the things that, the studio looking down on her, making money from her, but looking down on her, as they did all of the blondes. All the studios treated those women terribly, and also treated them as sexual objects. And you have to remember, these were studio bosses who came in the 20s. So by the 30s, 40s, 50s, they were fat old men who, because they ran the studios, they forced themselves on these beautiful women. And some of them were really gross. So these women had to put up with a lot of stuff. And then also people looked at them as not real, as not human. So they, it's like Rita Hayworth said, people go to bed with a character she played was Gilda. She said they go to bed with Gilda and they wake up with me. And because she was just a human being, but they were built up to such a goddess status, they weren't expected to be human. They were expected to be beyond that. And the men who fell in love with them and the women who fell in love with them expected for something magical to happen to them from interacting with these goddesses. And poor little Jean had a terrible life, terrible, terrible, terrible life. But she didn't let it show in her work. And one of the guys that she married, Paul Byrne, this will lead to some kind of metaphysical stuff. I have a metaphysical story about her and Marilyn. But she married a guy named Paul Byrne, who was like a director or, a bigwig in the film industry. He had helped her through her career get good movies and things like that. And so she loved him for helping her, and she married him. And he had some problems and he thought by marrying her, it should make him feel more of a man. And it didn't. And there were problems. And apparently at one point he beat her with a stick, with a cane, and which later on damaged her kidneys. One story. It could be true, it couldn't be true. Who knows? But she was damaged. Her kidneys were damaged from being beat because he got mad and frustrated. And later on, the damage from her kidneys is what killed her. But during their marriage, they were having this problem. And he was looking at her as a goddess. He was looking at her to rescue his life and change his life. And when the lights were off and the cameras were off, she was human. and she couldn't change him, and she couldn't help him. So he punished her for not being a goddess off camera. And they lived in a place in California that a beautiful mansion, and he killed himself. And then later on, when she died from renal failure at the age of 26, she and he both haunted that house. And actually, another blonde goddess from the 60s, Sharon Tate, her boyfriend, Jay Sebring, owned that house. And she was watching the house for him, and she had a ghost experience. She woke up, and the ghost of Paul Byrne was running around making noise, scaring the hell out of her in the bedroom. You know, she got out and ran down go down steps. And when she got to the steps, she saw an image of herself being tied and dead, you know, at the bottom of the stairs. She had a terrible omen. Yeah, because anyone that knows about Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring, because they ended up tragically being murdered by Charles Manson. And Jay Sebring stood up for her during that. He was really in love with her, and he was a great male aspect. And Sharon Tate, I look at it, Sharon Tate as a wonderful mother goddess aspect, because she was pregnant with her baby. Her baby was the most important thing to her, and she begged for her life. And they just didn't give it to her. She said, you know, let me have my baby, then you can kill me. They just were there to be brutal. But another blonde goddess, tragic, who was involved in that situation, you know. When Jean Harlo was dying, she was in a movie with Clark Gable, and she collapsed in his arms, and he carried her, you know, he got her to help. And the thing with Clark Gable, he was married to Carol Lombard. They were all friends. And Carol Lombard, another beautiful platinum blonde comedian, brilliant, beautiful. She was on a plane coming home from a Bonds thing in the 40s, and the plane crashed. And Kat was telling me the place where, on the mountain where they were trying to get the wreckage down from, Clark Gable went to there and was sitting in a bar, and he was tapping his fingers so much that his fingerprints were in the bar, were imprinted into the bar, because he was so worried. He loved her so much. Another blonde tragedy. And a lot of these blondes do have tragic lives. We're talking about Jean Harlo died when she was 26. Marilyn Monroe, 36. Jayne Mansfield, 34. You know, all of them just had tragedy. And out of that, they left behind things that make people fall in love with that energy they put up, the energy they were putting out. But a lot of that, what they put onto, they worked so hard to be these beautiful goddesses, but they really, some of it cost them their lives. So we look at it like Marilyn Monroe. People want to be like Marilyn Monroe. Well, Marilyn Monroe was a sad little girl. But before we go into Marilyn, Jean died at 26, and tragic, still remembered. But then the person that came after her, of course, was Marilyn. Now, Jean was very lucky as far as people remembering her. She died at the top of her career. She had wonderful, comedic, beautiful films. all these beautiful images of her as a wool-headed beauty. She was just beautiful. So her person that followed her, she died in the 30s, like I think 36. Marilyn came in the late 40s, early 50s. So when Marilyn came up, she was very influenced by Carole Lombard, Jean Harlo, and Lana Turner, another beautiful blonde who had a very tragic life, but another beautiful blonde. But when Marilyn came, there's never been another comment like Marilyn Monroe. And she came from such poverty and being an orphan, and she never got over being an orphan. And she wanted to be loved. Now with Marilyn had a metaphysical technique. I don't know that she knew exactly how it worked, but she knew how to do it, which she could turn on her aura. And she would tell people, she would be walking down the street, nobody paying attention to her. She'd be with someone, and she'd say, "You want to see her?" And she would turn on this light. And all of a sudden, everyone would see Marilyn. But if she wanted to hide, she'd just put on a rag, a scarf on her head, put on dark glasses, and go. But when she wanted to turn her on, she could go click. And there she was. She was that in control of her aura that she could turn that on at any time. Now, we're going to have to go to a break, but we'll be back in just a minute. So all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope.
That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz, coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama, and I am at my home in beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And we're talking about blonde goddesses. So we just kind of covered Jean Harlo, who, when she died like at the top of the waterfall. People were looking at her going, she was beautiful, she's talented, she's this. And then but the life that she had, the terrible things going on, the damages that she had, being Jean Harlo killed her at 26 years old. Dead. Now we're talking about Marilyn. Marilyn saw these images because when she was in foster care, foster homes, she had a mother who was mentally challenged and she had to be put away. So Marilyn was in orphanages and foster homes and treated like a slave. And they would drop her off at the theater just to get her out of the way. And so she saw these images and she wanted to be loved. All of these women wanted to be loved. And she wanted to be loved so hard that she embedded that. She opened that up in her energy field. And she became so in control of her aura, she could turn herself from little Norma Jean, a pretty little girl, into Marilyn Monroe, someone that everyone wanted to be. Everyone wanted to be her friend. Everyone wanted Marilyn. And so she went from being a waif to being the top blonde goddess of any of our eras. We remember Marilyn. We are still talking about Marilyn. Marilyn's clothing that she wore, the Happy Birthday, Mr. President dress, which sold for millions. Debbie Reynolds' collection sold the white dress she wore for great, which was a terrible time for her. That dress sold for $4 million. It was from a movie, 7-Year Itch, and the wind blew up, and in the 50s it was hot and saucy material because, a girl having her dress blow up, that's really naughty. Well, she had, that dress also is associated with one of the worst moments in her life because she was married to Joe DiMaggio, and he was watching them film this in front of thousands of people. He got furious, and at her, they would say, go higher when they blow her skirt up. So that night, they got into a fight. She got beat up a little bit because he just lost his mind on it, apparently, allegedly. And that ended in their marriage. That That moment ended their marriage. We look at that dress and we think, is that the epitome, the beautiful thing? That's the thing with these girls. The highest moments they ever got were always followed by something horrible, something tragic. And they were it's just something like a curse, really, for some of these beautiful blondes. But Marilyn, she had some terrible. I think she was really looking for someone to save her. And two, for these women to make it where they are, they had drive like nobody else. Marilyn had to fight to get to be Marilyn, to be as big a star as she is. And then when she got into the studios looked at her as a bimbo. And here she was. She may not have had a very much of an education. She had didn't have family. Really, she had some family relatives, but she didn't have family. She didn't have anyone to rescue her, or talk to her, or to be her confidant. And so she was the love that she felt like the people loved her. So she turned that love on so they would know her and see her. She turned her light on. It would be like being on a foggy street and seeing a light. Boom. I remember when I was a child watching these things and getting really obsessed with some of these blonde women. It happens sometimes. And she just was like, she was incandescent. She was metaphysical in a way, but she was so damaged and so scared at a certain point in her life. At one point when she first started, she was healthy. She was very healthy. She was doing things we're doing now. Jogging, healthy eating, exercise. She was doing that in the 50s. She was jogging. Nobody else was out jogging. They were losing their weight with, getting amphetamines and, take diet pills that would drop it off. They weren't exercising. She was ahead of her time. She was healthy and happy. When she kind of got hooked into, there's 2 or 3 things I think where you can tell her life kind of goes. She got into the actor studio, which they insisted upon psychoanalysis. When she started doing psychoanalysis, it made her unhappy because she had a terrible life. But she was healthy until then. She was happy. Then when she would choose someone to marry, she would just choose them. She just, at some point, said, I'm going to marry Arthur Miller because he's so smart. She had this thing about intelligent men. And she was intelligent. They acted like she was stupid. This girl was as stupid as, Winston Churchill. She was brilliant in her own way. But the men in her life, when she married, Joe DiMaggio, Joe wanted her to, he married her as an up-and-coming sex goddess of the universe, and he wanted her to be a little Italian wife, and it didn't work. She married Arthur Miller, the smartest man on the, very intelligent, very known writer, playwright. And she loved him. She loved intelligence. But when he married her, he benefited off of marrying her. Because when they were just dating, he was in trouble because in the 50s they had the Red Scare. And he was protecting friends of his who were artistic, that were leftists or liberals or whatever. And they were going to put him in jail, ruin his career. They would just ruin people's career, just the smell of them thinking, well, are you running around with commies or gay people or they ruined people's lives. You would have no idea. If you saw the things that they did to people back then, you just would be shocked. You just had to, they even went after Lucille Ball because her grandfather wanted her to be a communist because he was a communist. He came from somewhere else, and it was different. She just signed they had a card, when who are you, Republican, Democrat, whatever, and he wanted her to be a communist because he came from a different country. And she signed that just to make him happy. Well, it about ruined her. And the only reason they didn't is because she was such a big star, they let it slide. Well, Arthur Miller was in trouble for the same kind of thing. And the only thing that really saved his can was Marilyn Monroe, the sex goddess of the universe. She was, she was huge in her own time, and it saved him. She married him because he just kind of talked her into marrying him, and she thought he would respect her. And then she found a thing he wrote about her where he was embarrassed because she was so sexy and she wore clothes that were sexy. And I thought, well, you're not marrying Shecky Green. You married the sex goddess of the universe. She's going to sex. She could wear a potato sack. She was sexy, but she was wearing beautiful low-cut dresses, and he got very intimidated by that. And so he thought she was stupid and trashy. She wasn't. She just was married to the wrong man. And she was getting pregnant through him, and she wanted a baby so much. She wanted to love a baby. She wanted to be the mother. So we would consider Jean out of the maid mother. Jean would be the maid. Marilyn would have been a mother energy. And she tried so hard. And then when she kept having miscarriages, and then she found out, he thought she was tramp, and he was just using her a little bit, is the way I look at it. Allegedly, I would say, I would think he rode her coattail. But she wanted a baby. She wanted someone to love, and she kept losing the babies. And that's around the time she really started getting into drugs and alcohol. And we have people now that have that. You know, we know people that are poor that have problems with alcohol. My mother was an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. People fall into that. And the poor people fall into it. But add into it someone who the world has this idea of you, and you're supposed to be that. And you can't be that. You're like a little dragonfly flying in the air for a moment, and they go, oh, beautiful little dragonfly. But sometimes the dragonfly gets tired, and it gets older, and life gets in the way. So you can't hold yourself up to that flame. And then afterwards, you know, if you can't, and you can't hold that, people begin to lose their interest. They lose their interest in that portion of you. And if you've had the love of millions of people because of your beauty and your talent, your vitality, you know, it's like a drug. You want to keep that. So when these women begin to lose that, instead of appreciating that their talent is going to get deeper, the male society goes up. They're in their 30s. Chunk, if you turn 36, your career would be over. As a blonde goddess or a regular actress, a beautiful girl, when they got in their 30s, they would just go next, Chunk, and you would just be, if you found work, you'd be happy. But a lot of them couldn't get work after 30 or 40. They considered you over the hill. And that's when people are really actually starting to learn and get better. But Marilyn was 36 years old. She was having an alcohol issue. She was surrounded by scum as friends. She was hanging out with people who used her. She hung out at a place that Frank Sinatra owned, which was just covered in his gangster friends because he wanted to be a gangster. And they were using her because she had relationships with the president and his brother at the time. They used to go, ooh, it's a legend. But no, it's true. Because they were fascinated at chasing the blonde goddess. I mean, they chased Jane and Mamie Van Doren and Diana Dors. Anyone who was a hot blonde, they went after. And the mistake they made is they went after Marilyn, and then Marilyn was in a state of decline, and her mentality she didn't have judgment. And it was very sad because the gangsters were after her to get to the president, to get something on the president. The FBI was after her to get information on the president because the leader of the FBI was controlled by the gangsters because he was a drag queen on the side, or a trans woman on the side. And they found that, and they held that over him. And I can't think of what his name is at the moment, but he was a notorious FBI leader. Terrible, terrible. But they were all after her. And she was being filmed. She was being recorded. She was being pursued, and she knew it. And she had a need to be afraid, so she had a lot to be afraid with. But she, at the end of her life, just a few months before it, she did the president's thing that is such a historical thing. We're going to come back. We have to go to a break, but we'll be back, and we'll continue talking about the modern replacement of the goddess. And we'll be back with Marilyn. So All you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. 85 airports across the U.S. are in line for major upgrades as the Federal Aviation Administration announces it's allocating nearly $1 billion in grants to the task. The funding is from last year's bipartisan infrastructure bill. Upgraded passenger terminals and new control towers are on the work list. NPR's Tamara Keith has details.
The list of projects will see improvements at airports from Seattle to Orlando, with many smaller destinations in between. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said these projects include expanding terminal capacity, improving disability access, and even building a couple of new air traffic control towers.
All of this adds up to a better supported, more resilient system for the long term, even as we're working through more immediate issues, this summer, for example, that are simply more short-term than something that you can address with a construction project.
This announcement of infrastructure funds getting out into communities comes as air travelers face delays and cancellations during a busy summer travel season. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
WNBA star Brittany Griner has pleaded guilty to possessing cannabis oil on the second day of her trial in Moscow. Her fate increasingly a matter of diplomatic negotiation. NPR's Charles Maines has the latest.
Addressing the judge just moments after the prosecution had finished presenting its case, Griner admitted she brought a banned substance into Russia, a charge for which she faces up to 10 years in prison. But Griner said she never intended to violate Russian law. She said she mistakenly left vape cartridges containing hash oil in her bags as she packed for a flight from Moscow last February. Griner also said she would say more when her trial reconvenes a week from now. U.S. Embassy officials were in the courtroom and later confirmed they had delivered a private letter from President Biden to Griner before the start of the hearing. The White House considers Griner, quote, wrongfully detained and has said gaining her release is a priority. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
Under an avalanche of political demands that he surrender his post, Great Britain's Boris Johnson is stepping down as British Prime Minister. In an announcement earlier today in front of 10 Downing Street in London, Johnson said he'd leave office as soon as Britain's Conservative Party found a new leader.
I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves.
His 3 years in power were marked by political conflict as he led the UK out of the European Union and steered his nation through the COVID pandemic. The Dow closed up 346 today, the S&P 500 up 57. This is NPR. The hugely popular Netflix series Stranger Things is going to be adapted for the stage with the script by the show's creators, the Duffer Brothers. Jeff London reports.
With record-breaking streaming numbers for Season 4 of Stranger Things, it seemed inevitable that the Upside Down and the kids from Hawkins, Indiana would set out for new adventures. The sci-fi phenomenon will be adapted for the stage and produced by Sonia Friedman, who brought Harry Potter to Broadway, and Tony and Olivier Award winner Stephen Daldry, who will also direct. Matt and Ross Duffer will be working on the play, along with several other projects. For those not willing to wait for the play, one of the series stars, Gaten Matarazzo, is joining the cast of Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway later this month. For NPR News, I'm Jeff London in New York.
Actor James Caan has died. He was 82. Many fans knew him as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, but he had a wide range. Caan shocked and thrilled audiences in 1990's Misery, a film based on the Stephen King novel where he played a writer kidnapped by an obsessed and violent fan, played by Oscar-winning actress Kathy Bates.
Any for God.
Shh, darling. Trust me.
God's sake.
It's for the best.
Hey, please!
Caan moved audiences to tears playing the dying football player in Brian's Song, and he starred in many other hits, Thief, Mickey Blue Eyes, and Elf, just a few of them. I'm Louise Schiavone, NPR News, Washington.
We live in a world, a country, and a moment in time where there's so much important news, and it is constantly changing. That's why Up First is here for you. It's NPR's daily morning news podcast. In about 10 minutes, you can start your day informed. Listen to Up First on the NPR One app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to Universal Truths with Mark Fultz, coming to you from WBHM-DB in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm coming to you from my home in beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And we're talking about blonde goddesses, and we've gone through Jean Harlo, we're now talking about Marilyn. And Marilyn, when people look at Marilyn, they think, God, I would love to be like her. I would love to be beautiful and famous and wear all these beautiful clothing and be so stunning and be so loved. And behind the scenes, Marilyn never found love. She never found stability. Nowadays, I think with all the medicines we have, a lot of the problems she would have, it could have been treatable. But in the 50s and 60s, no. You were just if you were in trouble, you were just in trouble mentally. And she was in decline. She was addicted to drugs. She was but she had a fantastic way of being able, if she focused on somebody, she could get them. She wanted Arthur Miller, got him. She wanted the president. She got the president. She got the brother of the president. But at the time when they were coming in at the last part of her life, when she was having these drug issues, she wasn't herself. She had gone from being a beautiful, young, healthy girl who had gone through a terrible childhood, but she was better. She had found universal love, basically. But she was going down, and nobody could help her because you can't reach those people. It's like Michael Jackson and people like that. They're so headstrong that when they start to have problems, there's no one to be real. How can you make someone who has $40,000 at their, $40 million or whatever at their beck and call at any moment? You can't make them do anything. They're an adult. No one can make Marilyn get help or to go down another path. And she had become huge to be loved, and people loved her. But that love wasn't, it's one thing to be loved as an image, but to be loved personally, she couldn't access that love. So that love wasn't coming to her, and people wanted to rescue her. The reason we love her energy is because we feel like if I had been there, I could have helped Marilyn. I could have saved Marilyn. There was something so vulnerable about her. The goddess aspect was there, but she also had a great connection as a human. She had a terrible background. She had a terrible day. She wasn't able to find real friends. And Kat reminded me the name of the guy in charge of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, when she was in the thing with the Kennedys, the mob was wanting to get her information on him. They loved Marilyn, actually, because they could get her drunk and get information out of her. The mob was after her. The FBI was after her. The Kennedys were after her because they realized their mistake, because they would talk to her about sensitive government material, and that killed her. Some people, me personally, could have been suicide, yes. But with everything else, do I feel like it's something else? I think it could be something else nefarious, because there was a cover-up. And if there wasn't something to cover up, they should have left it alone. And if people had left Marilyn alone at the decline she was going to, I think she would have come to a bad conclusion at some point. But there was just too many players in this, and too many people seeing her as a tool. And she went from being a goddess to being damaged goods and a tool, something to get to someone else. And it ended tragically for her. And I have a story. There were some witches I knew from the 70s. And these two little girls had a Ouija board they were playing with. And they wanted to call in the spirits of Marilyn Monroe and Jean Harlo. And they wanted to pull them into them and become them, you know, become beautiful and famous. And they were little girls. They were like 10, 11. And so when they got to the one that wanted to be Jean Harlo, she got on the Ouija board and she said, I want to be like Jean Harlo. Now, she didn't say, I want to be beautiful, talented, loved like Jean Harlo. She said, I want to be Jean Harlo. She fell over in renal failure because Jean Harlo was dead. She wanted to be like Jean Harlo. She started dying. And they put her in the hospital, and she was going into renal failure because of the Ouija board thing. And the witches that I knew went in, surrounded her, broke the spirit away from the little girl, and the little girl lived. But that was, if she had said, I want the beauty and the talent, instead she said, I wanted to be Jean. Jean was dead. And the same thing could have happened with Marilyn. You know, Marilyn was dead. It's, you can't be these people. But, and there were ghost stories associated with several of these blonde women that I talk about. So we'll kind of get to that. But Marilyn, when she died, because we felt like she was the orphan that we couldn't save, Marilyn died with this different kind of thing. Jean Harlo was kind of a tough girl. She was kind of a funny, tough girl. She was not as vulnerable. We loved her. But we didn't have that same, we felt empathy and sorrow of her death. But Marilyn, we felt like it was a little damaged girl that died, and we wanted to rescue her, and we couldn't. So there was a whole different thing going on with Marilyn. And the same thing was going on with Jayne Mansfield. Now, if you ever knew who Jayne Mansfield is, Marilyn was like the champagne blonde, and Jayne Mansfield was the rock and roll kind of chick, or would have been. She was, she saw what was going on with the blonde sex symbol. It was, and she jumped on that bandwagon. And she was beautiful and blonde and talented. She had an IQ of 100 and what? I think it was 168. She knew 5 languages. She was a concert level violinist, I believe, and could play piano, I think. And so she scientifically figured out how I'm going to project myself into being a blonde goddess. And she started off a tragedy. When she was 3, her daddy and her mom were out running around in the car. Her daddy had a heart attack and died at the wheel. So Jayne always had this looking for a father figure, a love interest in a father figure, someone to take her. But when she became a blonde, she had measurements like the country was really obsessed with breast, and she had 40, 18, 36. So, you know, she would stop traffic. And the studios, Marilyn, it was during a time when Marilyn wanted to be taken seriously, wanted to be seen more as intelligent. So she quit doing movies, and she went to New York in the actor studio, and during that period, they went, we need someone to use as a tool to get at Marilyn. So there was Jayne. Jayne was extremely funny and beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, if you see pictures of her at her peak, she was beautiful. She was a little different beautiful than Marilyn, but she was a little tougher than Marilyn. And she was, whatever it took to get to the top, Jayne would do. And the reason Jayne got ahead, she would go to these premieres and things like that. She was at a premiere for a movie, Underwater, and she accidentally, on purpose, lost her top, which all these photographers were taking pictures. They couldn't publish them, but she became known. She was like, ooh, the beautiful blonde Broadway star. And she became second in line. She was the competitor for Marilyn Monroe. They would call her the working man's Marilyn Monroe. But she reached the top for a while of the blonde goddess. And I became obsessed with, when I was a teenager, I became obsessed with these blondes. Because in my artwork, I thought there was just something so incredible and angelic, and they were sexy, but I didn't respond to the sexy part of it. There was just this beauty to them. And so I became fascinated with them. And now I realize, as part of the thing, I like goddess energy. I like so I really was into them. I mean, really obsessed. And Jayne had success and was doing pretty good, but she was a little tawdry, but she was like a Kardashian. She was a 1950s Kardashian before there was a Kardashian. She knew any publicity was good publicity, whether it was bad or good. They're talking about your name. And she started doing all these things. She was, one time they had a ban on her because she was in the newspaper so many times in a small amount, like, thousands of words and thousands of pictures. She was, if she had been alive during the internet, we would see Marilyn, we would see Jayne Mansfield everywhere. She would eat it alive. And she just was known for being the biggest publicity-driven star ever. Even the Kardashians couldn't keep up with her. She was a one-woman band, and she got to the top. And she was second to Marilyn. And she was beautiful. She married a beautiful man named Mickey Hargitay, who was the epitome of masculinity. He was Mr. Universe, and she loved him. Now, the thing that the other two goddesses, Jayne and Marilyn, never got to have was she had 5 children. And this is one thing. She became the mother. So she would be a good mother aspect because she had her children. She loved children. She loved animals and children. She had tons of them. But she was kind of different for the 50s woman because the studios would say, they would tell you what to do and you were supposed to follow it. And they'd say, don't get married. She got married. Don't have children. She had 5. And she reached a peak of very, very being popular, very just incredible popularity. She's very associated with the 50s. And the thing with Jayne and Marilyn was the studio system was dying. It changed. It was going downhill. And in the 60s, it totally was dying. It was in its last grasp, the old Hollywood, before it broke. And then new Hollywood came in, which it wasn't as grand. And Jayne was really one of the last stars of the golden age. And where you could be known for being a celebrity. She was a celebrity. And when Marilyn died, Jayne thought, I'm going to be the next huge blonde, which she really would have been correct, except the system when Marilyn died. Hollywood and all this, they go, because Marilyn was difficult. So was Jayne. Jayne could be very difficult. And when Marilyn died, in such a sad story, they thought it's too heavy. And they were having trouble with Marilyn. They couldn't control Marilyn. They couldn't control Jayne. They couldn't control any of their blondes because there were a lot of them. And as soon as Marilyn died, the blonde goddess era was gone. It just evaporated. So all of these girls that were huge stars that the studios were making tons of money on, it wasn't their fault. The studio changed. The times changed. We were going in the 60s. Marilyn died right before the hippie movement. And if Marilyn had lived long enough, the hippies, because I was alive during that time, anything that the hippies, the young kids, anything their parents liked, they were against. So anything like the Sweater Girls, the Marilyns, and all of that, the Jayne Mansfields, they saw it as old hat. And they just went, no, that our parents liked it, we don't like that. If Marilyn had lived long enough, if Marilyn had lived to be an old woman, lived to get old, lived to get fat, we would remember Marilyn, but Marilyn wouldn't be Marilyn like we know her. I think she would have outlived her goddess symbol in a way. And Marilyn died to us at the peak of her beauty. Well, when she died, all of the blondes that were so popular, there was Deanna Dors, there were Sherry North, there were all these beautiful blonde women. Well, all of a sudden, the Hollywood went, it's over. We weren't making, they were really putting a lot on Marilyn to save their studio. And when she died, that movie didn't happen. So they lost, and Cleopatra was having a lot of trouble with, with Liz Taylor, and they lost a lot of money. And so they went, it's not a good money maker anymore. Now it's a sad thing. It's done. Boom. So all of the women that were under contract, that were blondes, they just started handing them to European markets, and they would make these terrible movies. Well, but the studio would get paid a huge amount. Every time Jayne was put into a movie, they made $500,000. She made her regular fee, but they made money. So the market changed, and Jayne didn't know what to do. So the era of the blonde goddess was kind of done. It was dying. And she didn't know how to do it. And she was so intelligent, but she was so driven. She had her foot on the gas pedal. She thought, now that Marilyn's dead, I'm going to be the biggest blonde symbol in the world. Well, no, the studio kind of threw her away. And when she realized that she wasn't going to be the top of the heap, she made sure if she couldn't be the top blonde goddess, no one would be. And she, because of when it turned on her, and she was unfortunately getting into alcohol and things, because they just saw her as a joke. They treated her like a joke, and they gave her to these movies that were just terrible. But she was still making money. She was still a star. So, but it turned on her, and she went from being a fun blonde symbol to being talked about as a joke. I remember after she died, in the 70s, there were books that go, well, Jayne Mansfield was nobody. She wasn't Marilyn, which that's not true or fair. She had some very funny things. And in still pictures, she was gorgeous. Just a beautiful, beautiful thing. But she met tragedy as she was going down, like Marilyn did. Marilyn died before she went too far. Jayne lived long enough for it to catch up with her. And it would have caught up with Marilyn, probably, and Jean. So she became in an era where the young people were going, no, we don't want that. We want girls to look like Twiggy. We want them to be flat. We want them to have long hair and not be so manufactured. And so it wasn't Jayne's fault in a way. In a way, there are some things that were her fault, but the majority, because of the shift after Marilyn, none of the blondes were making it. And Jayne was still making money. People, they acted like she was a joke. But guess what? At the end of her life, she had 2 movies that came out after her death that she was in. She was still a star. She was making terrible movies, but she was making them. And as a woman, an independent woman, they paid her $5,000 to open supermarkets. This woman was rich. When she died, what happened is people sued her because she was in so much trouble. But she was still rich. She was still making money. She was still a star, even though it was fading. She was the very last holdout for that. And she had a very traumatic death. I was 5 years old in 1967. We were riding in this car, old-fashioned car in the 50s, from the 50s. And it was before cars had seatbelts, and I was standing up in the back seat. It was 5 years old, and they came on the news in 1967 and said, in June 29th, I think it was, and they said Jayne Mansfield has been decapitated. And I didn't know what that meant. My mother told me as a 5-year-old. She said, well, she told me what that was, and I thought, ooh, I better sit down, because it was in a car wreck. And but from that moment, I felt sorry for her because my mother said she had children and everything. And women really liked Jayne because she was a mother. And so, again, metaphysically, we have a mother. We don't have the crown yet. But Jayne ended very tragically. And all 3 of these blondes, too, all of them, there were ghost stories of each one. Jean haunted the house that Paul Byrne, her husband, had killed himself in. She and he both haunts that house, allegedly, from what I hear. Marilyn haunts the house she lived in, which was the only home she had ever purchased on her own. It was a real home. It was hers. And she haunts that. And Jayne Mansfield haunted her Pink Palace. They talked about she haunted it for a long time. And when she was killed, the 60s, she was she didn't believe anything was bad publicity. So there was a guy, Anton LaVey, who was a Satanist, and he was getting a lot of publicity. So she became friends with him, and she had pictures made with him because she looked at it as publicity. And it did, but it backfired on her a little bit in Christian America. She just thought it was something to shock people, and it did. But she became friends with Anton LaVey. And her boyfriend was named Sam Brody, she would never have gotten away from him. He was very obsessed with her, and it was very dangerous. He was a very dangerous kind of guy. And he was jealous of her friendship with Anton LaVey, so he didn't believe in the Satanists having any power. So he broke in, messed with the guy's altars, threatened him. And finally, one day, Jayne called Anton because she was getting beaten and asking him to help her. And Sam Brody got on the phone and started threatening him, and he says, you're going to be dead in a year. And he told Jayne, he said, stay away from him. He's going to be dead. And if you look at the pictures, which I don't suggest it for anyone who's squeamish, there were pictures of Jayne Mansfield's wreck. Before they had the final crash, he had been in other wrecks. He had been in like 3 or 4 wrecks coming up to this wreck. And he was wearing a cast, and you can see his destroyed body, but he's wearing a cast from the last car wreck, which I've seen a picture of her wheeling him out of the hospital to go on this trip. She couldn't get away from him, and Anton LaVey said, if you don't get away from him, you need to get away from him, and she couldn't. and he was with her in the car. And she had 3 of her children in the back, and they had the wreck. And everyone makes a big deal going, she wasn't decapitated. But at the time, that's what they said. And, Jayne was like shocked and flocky stuff. And even though she was probably shocked about that, she would be like, well, they remember me. So I don't think she'd be too offended that that's the way it ended. It's just the way it ended. But she has a daughter. And I mean, really in the 70s and 80s and 90s, they were cruel about Jayne. In the books, they'd say she was nobody. She was no talent. She had a facade that blah, 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 blah. She was different than Marilyn, but she was very funny. She was very beautiful. She had a lot of good aspects to her, but they just treated her as nobody. It was very cruel. But in the 80s and 90s, thanks in part to Betty Page, people started looking up the pinups, because Marilyn and Jayne came from being pinups, and so did Jean Harlo. They were all beautiful pinups. So Betty Page became very famous. And so they rediscovered all these beautiful girls. And now the young girls that get all the tattoos and stuff, all these pinup burlesque girls who, they love them. And so and Jayne Mansfield's youngest daughter, Mariska Hargitay, became a great actress of her own. She's very strong. She would be a good goddess aspect, but she is a very strong woman. She plays on TV, and she's very famous. Well, people rediscovered Jayne. Now she's kind of rock and roll. She was one of the first goddesses to be nude in a major movie. Everyone was fascinated with these women sexually, but you couldn't take it too far. Jayne took it a little too far for the time, but now she was ahead of her time. And she became, now if you look online and put in Jayne Mansfield, there's all these videos about how to look like Jayne, how to do her hair, stories about her. She's really kind of having a renaissance because her daughter is such a successful actress. She's now getting her due, I think, for the work she did. She did have work. She was very interesting. But she also was a thing of, she's the example of how when the men are done with you, it's over. So the men in Hollywood said, she's over. Next. And she was a victim of the patriarch. All of these women also were in the constraints of what women were expected to be. And they were outside of the envelope. So in a way they got punished. You're beautiful and you're sexy, but you're not somebody you're not a woman that, a regular woman. And it was very sad. And actually with Jayne Mansfield, I think her reincarnation, to me, I have this feeling, Anna Nicole Smith, who would be the modern Jayne Mansfield in a way. She was born in Texas, just like Jayne. She was born the year, I think, that Jayne was killed. She came up and was from nothing and became this beauty who was known for her beauty. But when her beauty started to go and she was having problems, she became a joke. And people just loved to watch that train wreck like they did Jayne. And then it ended in tragedy for her. Because the day or second day after she had her baby girl, her son died right next to her. And she didn't recover from that. Jayne Mansfield died and left her children. In this case, her son died and left her. And she couldn't do without him. And she couldn't even enjoy the birth of her new child. She was so devastated over her son. And then she died. She basically grieved herself to death. And another tragic blonde, another tragic blonde is like I said, Sharon Tate, who she saw the ghost of Paul Byrne, which connects her to Jean Harlo. She, Dorothy Stratton, another beautiful blonde. By the 60s, when the 60s ended, the blonde thing was really over. There were some who had some success over it, but not like a Marilyn at all. And even Doris Day, her career as a blonde sex symbol went until 1969. Jane died in 67. By 69, it was over. In the 70s, we had Farrah Fawcett and Jillian Anderson, I think her name was. There were some blondes, Suzanne Sommer, but they were different. And they weren't held in the same esteem as a Marilyn or a Jean or Jane. And now we're starting, we have different goddess images metaphysically, so we have to have goddess images. So we grab onto the ones we have. And a lot of people have grabbed onto different ones that are there, but it's still in our life, it seems to be in the entertainment field. And that would be like Madonna. Madonna, when she came, she was very dramatic, very strong woman. Everyone loves, a lot of people love a strong woman, but a strong, creative, writing, dancing, singing, megalith here. And Madonna, when she was young and beautiful, and that she's still beautiful, but after she got into a certain phase of her life, they just went chunk, and she has to find her way back. But she's good at reinventing herself, and she's going to do a movie about herself. And I think when she does, she can reconnect to that maiden thing and come out. But a lot of people worship her as a goddess, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, she was huge, huge. And if you're a child of now, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't have a clue. But everything she would do, every video she would do, every song she would do, it was happening. It was amazing. And she's just kind of, now she would be a mother. She's adopted children. She's had children. She's apparently a very good mother. Strange person, but a very good mother. Very strict mother. But she's turning out children who are independent, self-sufficient. And she doesn't give handouts and things like that. She's very severe. But she loves her children. I can tell that she does. And her children are beautiful. And herself as a person, I'm not sure how we care for her as a person, but as an entertainer, she's phenomenal. As a goddess representation, she's wonderful. And now she would be like the crone. She'd probably kill me if she knew me. She'd kill me if I said, well, you're the crone energy. But that means the crone energy, even though that sounds terrible, that means you're the mature, wise one. You're the one who takes care of business. The maid and the mother are there, but you're the one who's there, the wise one. And so she should have the wisdom now. She has, she's fighting the misogyny. She's in ageism that's going on, because when they go, oh, well, you're old, you need to go away. But one thing that is kind of good in our time right now, we do love some of the older women. We love the Chers, Dolly Parton, Madonna. Some people, I would say Barbra Streisand, but people go after me for that probably. But Barbra Streisand, who fantastic talent. And we just had Betty White, who almost lived to be 100. She was an institution. People loved her. Cloris Leachman, I think she was almost 100. Debbie Reynolds, who was very close with her daughter, Carrie Fisher. And they had such an unusual mother-daughter relationship that I've been watching all of them. They were really busy. I mean, even though Debbie was going down, as far as health-wise and everything. Her daughter and her were very current. They were doing a documentary that actually came out after they died. And when Carrie died of a heart attack, I heard that. I went, well, Debbie will be going with her. And the next day, apparently they said, Debbie said, I want to be with Carrie. And she just went to sleep and died. She willed herself to die to go be with her daughter. And it was beautiful and sad at the same time. But those incredible women and challenges, you know. We all love strong women, or we should. And in the gay field, we all love strong women, and because we love the feminine. And they were wonderful examples of that, because she really loved her daughter, and her daughter really loved her. And they had each other's backs, and we all wish we had that. But, you know, so who are the new goddesses? You know, some people, I think, worship Britney Spears. For a little bit, I think people will, you know, there are several that are very interesting. I want to keep my eyes on. Britney's had a hard time, but a lot of people are really fascinated with Britney. She can't do any wrong. I mean, if she puts out something, she's going to make millions and millions of dollars. Madonna's oldest daughter, Lourdes Leon, fierce woman. I can tell looking at her. She's not her mother, so don't make the mistake of thinking she's going to be the next Madonna. She's going to be who she is. And I think we need to watch her. I think she's a good goddess energy to look for, because she's very strong, very earthy, beautiful, but she's like a darker image of her mother. She has this beautiful black hair. She's pretty and fierce, but very talented. Even Madonna says she's more talented than Madonna. And I don't think Madonna would say that lightly. She doesn't have the drive her mother has. She'll say that. But she has something about her. I think she will be one of the women that breaks the barriers. We need more barriers broken. Women aren't being held like goddesses. They're being treated as secondary citizens. And they're still not being paid. They're not being treated, you know, right now we have the war on women in a way. And we have to fight harder as men and women to make sure women are respected and loved and treated. Women are the well of life, kids. You know, women are the well of life. If we didn't have women, we wouldn't have mothers. And, you know, the father is an important thing, but without the mother, the cup, they are the cup of life. It's so important. The thing with these blonde goddesses we've been talking about is all of them were looked at as beautiful creations. Well, I've got to go to a break, but I'll be right back with you. So all of you out there in the dark, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope.
That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Universal Truths here at WBHM-DB in beautiful Birmingham, Alabama. And this is Mark Fultz coming to you from his home in beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And we've been talking this show about our blonde goddess replacements, our replacements for goddess, because it's hardwired into our system. We find goddesses to worship because they're not being offered to us through the church systems that exist. And in metaphysics, we find our own goddess spirit energy to embody, because we need that empathy and love. And if you have too much testosterone, you have war, you have problems. And with the woman, we have to, you get the nurturing and you can get the love. You can also have some ass kicking in there somewhere, or butt kicking. But we want strong women with a strong view. These women that I talked about, they were strong in their own ways. They rose to the top of their careers and the top of their world. And some of them they fused that wonderful goddess energy into their image, and we love them. We love them. Even though the world turned on them, gave them horrible times, they ended tragically, we still love them. And there are goddesses now. There will be people that you will go and fall in love with. You'll fall in love with the Britney. You'll fall in love with the Lourdes Leon. You'll fall in love with the Christina Aguileras, or the Lady Gaga. She's a goddess representation right now. Strong. She had problems for a little while. She straightened out. She's a strong, independent woman, talented, beautiful, and very, very ladylike in a way. I like to watch her interaction with older people, because she treats them the way that the Crown would teach, to respect and love and comfort the elderly, like Tony Bennett, like Liza Minnelli, and she just seems like a delightful, wonderful, sweet girl. But we look at these larger-than-life women, and we hold them in the goddess aspect, because we don't have anything else, because we aren't being offered goddesses. So we still will find new goddesses to love and to look at. And in our regular lives, we need to raise up. As men, we need to raise up and raise up the women. When the women call women liberation, I heard Betty Davis say, well, the men liberate the women. Well, the women have to liberate themselves. The men, if you're waiting for a man to liberate you as a woman, it's going to be a long wait. They don't even know how to liberate their damn selves. But like I said, the woman is the cup of life. We need to respect them. We need to love them. We need to lift them up. We as men need to respect who we are as God aspects. We need to live a little better. We need to quit being tramps. We need to raise ourselves up. We need to be the fathers we need to be. The women need to be the mothers they need to be. The children need to be respected and held in high regard. They're not just a pet rock. They're a spirit They're a spirit who is growing. The body is growing up with the spirit in it. They have to become a full-formed being, and we're there to help them blossom in happiness and health and strength. We need to all be good. And I understand why we have these goddess images and why we go to them. And but we need to look within ourselves, find the God and goddess within ourselves, and raise ourselves and raise those around us, and have them and be respected and be respectable. Follow your word. Be a good man. Be a good woman. We all have a limited time. We're like the little dragonflies, like the Jayne Mansfield and Marilyn and Jean Harlo. We're like the little dragonfly suspended in air. And we only go so far before our little wings give out. But while it's there, make it count, baby. Now, we're reaching the end of this show. I hope that you got something out of this. I've never really heard anyone talk about why we are so fascinated with these beautiful blonde goddesses. And we have, like I said, it's kind of an ancient angel kind of thing. In a way, they have a beautiful, not quite sexual always with it, but sometimes, but they have a beautiful feminine quality that's as fine as silk. And we're always going to love them, and we'll love more. And but I hope that you enjoyed this show. And I am going to tell you now, anyone, of course, that needs to contact me, you can reach me through my website. You can look at my Things From website. But if you want to contact me, you can contact me on Facebook at Chattanooga Chills, which is, I have a Chattanooga Chills ghost tour and stuff like that. But then on Facebook, it's Mark Fultz, Chattanooga Chills. I work at the Live and Let Live Metaphysical Store in Pensacola on 4622 South Leafield Road. You can always call in ahead to make sure I'm there if you're wanting to see me, because I'm usually off on Wednesdays. Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm not there. But I'm there in portions during the week, and then I'm there all day Saturdays from 11 to 7. So if you want to meet me, call me and let me know there at the store, and they'll let me know. Tell them to let me know. Say I said on the radio, call Mark, make sure he's coming in. I'm there, and I'm also, besides just doing this radio show, I do readings, I do murder investigations, I do missing persons work. So, if you have an issue that you need me to address, I'm reachable. I feel very happy to be a metaphysical person and to be given this beautiful life that I have, and I'm so grateful to Kat Hobson and Teal Gray for getting me into this radio show and to be able to talk to you out there in the dark. Anyone who's listening, I appreciate it, because you're taking out 2 hours of your life to listen to this person you can't see. You just hear me in the dark. And it means a lot. It means a lot to me. And I've been very lucky. I mean, right now I'm in a lot of productions. I've got an album coming that I'm making. I've got books. I've got stuff. So we're going to have a fun time. And we're going into, if you imagine 3 months, it'll be Halloween. So I'm like a little squirrel putting his nuts up for winter. I'm getting ready. I'm doing all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to have different subjects, different things for you, but I'm trying to think outside the box. So that's why I gave you this tonight. Now you can go look up Jean Harlo. See how beautiful. Just look at the pictures. Look how beautiful she was. Look at Marilyn. Look at Jayne. When Jayne was at her peak, she was gorgeous. Gorgeous. Look at Sharon Tate. Look at Carol Lombard. All of these women were very funny, intelligent, beautiful, loving, and there's a reason that they're still known. And I think we should look them up. I think you should look them up and see why they rank as a goddess, because they had good reason to. And then you can look at the men too. There were some great men back then, but the women, and even without the blondes, if we think about Maureen O'Hara, I remember her. Oh, fiery red, beautiful, beautiful girl in person, beautiful. People like that. Susan Hayward, lots of beautiful things. And I think one of my next shows that I'll be coming up with, we're going to look at the girls that reached the peak, but they were eaten by society for different reasons. People who crashed and burned, and why society gets hooked on that, why they like to see the carnage of someone's life that they're living in the public, and all they want to do is be happy and make a living and be happy and be loved. And some people make it, some people don't. They crash and burn. Why do we as people, why are we fascinated with that? Why are we ghoulish about some of these things, like some of the deaths of celebrities or the death of famous people? Why are we fascinated with these things? Why do we have that? And why do we have to have that? And everyone has kind of a dark side along with our light side. That's why we like horror movies. We get to live out something primitive in ourselves without it safely being able to exhibit those and go through that feeling without having to be in danger or to be surrounded by zombies or to be, why do we like trouble for famous people? Why do we like to see that? It's because we feel like we want to see that they're like us, but we want to see them fail. Maybe we should rethink it and try to figure out how to make people succeed and stay as successful as possible, not to see them suffer. And as humans, we have a lot of weirdly strange aspects. It doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us complex. So maybe we'll cover some of that. So I'm gonna ponder on it. But until we get there, because there will be some breaks in July, because I think Kat has to go on vacation or go somewhere. So I'm going to try and figure out the best I can for you. And then too, I'm probably going to work on doing. I did a show before I did this, became on this radio show, about the Anunnaki. So I may do a comparison of Christianity and Anunnaki stories. That may be my next one. And I'll do that for my own show. So you can sit there and kind of go, oh, because some of it is it's pretty weird until you just go, oh, but that sounds like it makes sense. So, like Adam, or Adapa, as they called him in the Sumerian records, they had to take a rib to make Eve. Why would they do that? Had to clone a woman from his material because he was hybrid. So maybe we'll cover the Anunnaki next. So anyone who's interested in that, we'll try and do that next Thursday. But we are coming to the end of our show. And I want to thank you all out there. I want to thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy what we're doing, and I hope you come back. And so all of you out there in the dark, have a good evening. We'll talk to you later. See you then.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.